I'm Caitlin, and welcome to the Lit Review. Today is all about the July reading wrap-up where I talk you through my thoughts and feelings about all of the books I read in July. I'll also give you a stats breakdown of all the cool stuff I read because I think that's super fun. And so let's get through some of those stats before we get into the whole thing. So this July I read 8 books, which is a bit more than I was anticipating, so I'll take it. I'm kind of leveling out here a little bit, getting back to bigger reading habits. I read 2,663 pages, and then I did listen to an audiobook this month, so I listened to roughly 19 hours and 45 minutes worth of an audiobook, and my average rating this month was a 3.68. So, I liked a lot of what I read this month, so you love to see it. In terms of my audience, it was mostly adult. I read 4 adult books, 0 of the new adult books, and 4 YA. So it was actually kind of split. I shouldn't say it was mostly adult. In terms of genres, the things that I really loved reading this month were romance, particularly contemporary romance was a really big one, and then fantasy, my old friend, my good standby. And then in terms of formatting, I read 1 audiobook, 1 ebook, and 6 physical books. And of those 8 books total that I read, 6 of them were owned and 2 of them were borrowed from the library. So I did make some good progress on my owned TBR, and that feels pretty good. I always love it when I can make that happen. So I had a pretty good cluster in terms of my ratings. I didn't have any books that severely disappointed me this month, which means no DNFs. No 1 stars, no 1.5 stars. Same for no 2.5 stars. I did have 2 3-star ratings, 3 3.5 ratings, 2 4-star ratings, no 4.5s, but 1 magical 5-star read. And I can't wait to tell you about them all. So let's get into it. I'm gonna go through this in kind of chronological order, or at least the order in which I read all the stuff. So the first book I read this month was If I Never Met You by Valerie McFarlane. And this was a romantic comedy that I was originally intending to read, in June, I think, for Romanceathon, but I never got around to that poor TBR. So I've been trying to make my way through them because I still really wanted to read those books. And that was one that I had out from the library, so I felt like I had to finish it in a timely manner or else have it yanked away from me. And I have to tell you, that's a book that I would actually consider purchasing even though I have returned it to the library because it was a 4-star read for me. I was really captivated by Lori, our main character, who has to kind of injure into a fake dating situation to save her pride and her reputation at her law firm after her partner of 18 years, Dan, not only dumps her, but immediately gets into a relationship where he is pregnant with somebody when he was very hesitant to start a family with Lori. So as part of a scheme to both save her reputation and for Jamie, the guy she's in a fake relationship with, to kind of get in good with the bosses and prove that he's a stable character, they have a fomance, and they're very, as with most fake dating, they have a very serious plan to get it done. What I really loved about If I Never Met You is that it was a slow burn. I often don't like slow burn romances because I'm there for a purpose, I want the gratification. But what I really loved about it this time around is it felt so true to Lori as a character because she spends a lot of the novel coming to terms with and grieving the loss of this 18-year relationship. And then when she finally does start to have feelings again, she really has complicated personal feelings about having an emotional connection with somebody new. And I also think what this book did so freaking well was talk about the importance of female friendships and the good and the bad of those friendships and how just powerful and impactful they are. So I felt like the conversations that were had between the characters in this novel were just so amazing and genuine, and I really cared about these characters by the end. So it was a 4-star read for me. Really recommend If I Never Met You by Valerie McFarlane, and I know she has written a bunch of other stuff, so I'm honestly going to check out her writing because I really liked her character development. So the other one this was my audiobook for the month, and that is the Iliad by Homer. And to be honest, there are several different translations that I ended up reading throughout my reading of this audiobook. Mostly I swapped around until I found a narrator I kind of liked. I tried reading this in physical form first, and it was just a lot. Because it's epic poetry, you know, like for me it is so, I highly recommend if you're trying to listen to or read something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, like do it on audiobook because it's epic poetry. It was meant to be heard. It was meant to be read out loud. You're going to get the better experience, the more authentic experience that way. And it's also, you really kind of understand the form of it. The thing that I think for modern readers that can get kind of frustrating about things like the Iliad and the Odyssey in particular is that there's a lot of repetition. A lot. Because that was like, you had to remind your audience very frequently. If you're telling everything out loud, you have to remind them constantly. So I always think about when Kristen from Perks of a Bookflower read the Odyssey. She said that if she had to hear one specific phrase one more time, she was going to yeet the book into the Aegean Sea. And I felt that so hard. I laugh about that still to myself all the time. Kristen, that's like one of my favorite things that I've ever heard on BookTube. But I felt that really strongly with the phrase shepherd of the people to describe Menelaus and his brother. If I had to hear shepherd of the people one more time, I was just like, oh, stop. So even understanding that that was a relevant form of communication for this text originally, it was real difficult. I will say that listening to the Iliad did make me appreciate Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles more. So it gave me a much stronger feeling of that. And I ended up giving the Iliad 3.5 stars because there was still a lot of value in that reading of it for me and like reminding myself of these stories and these tales. The repetition got to me a little bit. And I also think like the pacing, because it's really just this big battle epic and you're just plopped right into the middle of it. And you always think about the story of Troy and like the buildup and everything, but it really isn't actually communicated to you that much. It is very much a battle epic. You are in it for like the last several years of the siege of Troy. And it's mostly about the battle. So if that's the kind of thing that's going to appeal to you, then go for it. I didn't dislike it. It just wasn't as impactful as I remembered. So I definitely happily returned that to the library and was very glad to have listened to it on audiobook. Since the first two things that I've mentioned were things that I returned to the library, it's worth mentioning that I have two boxes next to me down here. One is my no box and one is my maybe box. And this is what happens with each of the remaining physical books that I'll be talking to you about. I will either be keeping them, putting them back on my shelves wherever they belong, or I will be putting them in one of these boxes. So if I'm undecided about whether or not I'd ever like to reread it or keep it, it goes in the maybe box. And if I am confident that it is not going to stay with me, it goes in the no. And then my goal is to, once those boxes fill up, be able to do like an unhaul or a decision with you when those boxes fill up. And I would say they're both like not quite at half, so we've got a ways to go. But for the remainder of this video, that information is going to be relevant for you because they're all physical books. So the first physical book I read in the month of July was The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. This is my ARC copy. I've talked about this a lot on my channel about how I had this ARC for over a year from going to Y'all West and like neglected it, and I'm really disappointed in myself that I neglected it because I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It is a bit of an exception that proves the rule. I've already shared with you on my love to loathe to video that Westerns are not really my jam, but this is a Western inspired fantasy that really hooked me, and I think it was mostly the fantasy elements that like got me interested and motivated. But The Good Luck Girls follows the group of girls who are on the cover, but it is mostly through the perspective of older sister Astrid, and the action of this novel is kicked off when Astrid's younger sister Clementine kills a man on her first night, because they are all originally kind of in what they call a welcome house, but it's essentially a bordello. And so they all escape together and escape in the hopes of being able to remove this magical symbol that's on all of their necks that identifies them as Welcome House girls. So I ended up really caring about the characters a lot. I will say that if you're interested in this book, I would give some pretty serious trigger warnings. While there isn't a lot of direct action-oriented writing about things like rape and sexual trauma, you definitely are dealing with characters who have been in a Welcome House against their will, and so they have a lot of memories and built up like barriers and emotional coping mechanisms that are 100% related to their traumatic past. You also are going to get some both physical and mental torture in here, so warnings for that as well. I do think it's worth the read. This is a young adult Western-inspired fantasy, and it is the first book in a series, so you do kind of get left at a juncture. I won't say like a cliffhanger, but you're left at a juncture for these characters that I'm really interested in seeing where they go. So I will be keeping this ARC copy, but additionally, now that I can buy books, I would very much like to purchase Good Luck Girls, because since I got this as an ARC at a like convention type thing, I would really like to give Charlotte Nicole Davis my money. But I've been looking and I can only find it in hardback currently, so I may hold off and wait until I can get it in paperback, because I love the floppy paperback situation, but this is definitely a future purchase, and in the meantime, I'm keeping this art cover. And the next thing I read in July was Witchy by Ariel Slamette Reese. And this is a graphic novel that I got in Owl Crate a couple of months ago. I want to say in either May or June. I can't remember which one we had the double, but this is a graphic novel. So the author is both the author and the illustrator, and I believe they are non-binary, I believe. And if I'm misrepresenting that, that's on me. I do know that the author also identifies as biracial. So Witchy takes place in a fantasy world of Hyalan, and in Hyalan, the power of each individual witch is determined by the length of their hair. And if you have long hair, you're often conscripted into the Witch Guard, because that means you're powerful enough to protect the kingdom. But on the flip side, your hair can indeed be too long, and if your hair is too long, you're gonna get burnt. Like, they have an actual witch burning. So the main character, Nineveh, her father, his hair was too long, and so she also has very long hair and kind of lives in fear of that being discovered. And so this is really her journey. I would say this is like almost a coming of age tale too. And there is fantastic rep in this book. There is a trans character that we see a lot of. I believe one of the characters that we see briefly towards the end, it would identify as non-binary, although again, not explicitly stated. So I could be misrepresenting that. But really cool representation in here. A lot of like different body types being praised and valued and loved. And so it was just like a really inclusive world that was really exciting to read about and experience. So I felt like it was coming from a really genuine place given the author's own identity. And I know that this is a webcomic, so you could probably track this down. I, again, love having the bind up. It says 1 on here, so I'm looking forward to seeing another bind up. I gave this one 3 stars, and part of the reason why I gave it a 3 stars, which is still a good rating, it means I liked it. I like the color of the art style. Like, I really love the color saturation and these like pastels and neons, but I wasn't like 100% sold on the art style for my personal preferences. So that's why I think it gets a 3. The story is great. I really want to see what happens with Nineveh and the rest of the characters here. But yeah, it's a 3, and I think it's going to go in the maybe box, because while I really enjoyed reading this and want to read more of Nineveh's story, I'm not convinced I'm going to reread it. And I actually think that this might, what I need to think this through is like, if I hold on to it, am I doing so to like pass it off to somebody else? Like, at what point am I keeping it? So it's kind of a maybe, but I still very much recommend this as a read and a pickup, especially if you like graphic novels. So the next book that I read for July was P.S. I Still Love You by Jenny Han. This is the second book in the To All the Boys I Loved Before series, and I gave this a 3.5 star rating. I honestly think the first book in this series so far is better in terms of just writing and plot. This book does have a love triangle. You get to meet one of the boys that you kind of sort of know about from the first book, John Ambrose McLaren. And if you've seen the movies, I really like how he is portrayed in the movie, but I also really loved the characterization that we didn't get to see in the movie in the book. Potentially unpopular opinion, I think she chooses the wrong person. So there's that. I will be keeping this because I would like to see where the rest of the series goes. I do own the third and final book in the series, and I think I'll probably make a choice about the whole series after I finish the third one. I do really like Jenny Han's writing style in terms of like the sweetness of it. Like, it's very appropriate for the character of Laura Jean. There were moments, especially early on, where it was almost like a little too sweet for me, but it, again, is a really fun, light read. Recommended if you are in the mood for like light, sweet romance. And it's like sweet angst, if that's a thing. I would categorize Laura Jean as sweet angst for sure. Then I decided I wanted a break from my Litland TBR trajectory and decided to pick up another book from that failed Romanceathon TBR, which was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. 5 stars. 5 stars all day long. One of the best contemporary romances I've ever read. That's it. Like, I love these characters so much. I've already done the mid-year freakout tag, but if I were to do it again, these characters would be on it in terms of like crushes and just people that I care so much about. Like, I love Chloe and Red so much. You are in both of their heads frequently. I wouldn't say equally, but frequently. And I loved how distinct their voices are. I think multiple perspectives is something I love in a novel because it's hard to do, to make those characters feel like wholly separate people written by the same author. It's impressive, especially when you're trying to get them to fall in love with one another. So I love it when it's done well, and this is done exceedingly well. While I may not be the best person to speak to the accuracy of the representation, it felt like good representation for somebody with fibromyalgia, for somebody who was used to people treating them differently because of the color of their skin and the size of their body. Like, just Chloe Brown as a character is one of my just favorite humans in fiction. Same goes for Red. When I say that something was good representation-wise, and it's something I can't necessarily directly speak to, I mean it felt good to read about. It felt authentic. It felt like it was coming from an informed place on the author's part. So I am not the right person to like make the judgment on whether it is factually good, but as a reader, it felt good to see that kind of representation, and to see it on so many different levels, and to also, I feel like there's really good mental health rep from both characters in here. So like, that part I do feel a little bit better equipped to speak to, but like, it was really impactful to read this book. Not just from the just adorable romance, but just this genre is capable of so much. And this is one of the hallmark books that I would hold up to show how good contemporary romance can be. I just really appreciated how both of these characters, in terms of flaws and things to love about them, were so fully realized. They felt very much like real people to me, and I am so freaking excited to read about the other Brown sisters, like this family even. Like, again, I really loved being in both of their heads. Like, the love story is so good. This is a book that is hyped for a reason. Like, sometimes I read other hyped books and I just don't get it. We'll get into that in a minute. But this deserves it, in my opinion. It's gonna be one of my favorites of the year. Blown away by this. Gonna consume a frick ton of Talia Hibbert's writing. Like, she's a phenomenal writer. Her characters are great. The sex scenes are great. Just like emotions, beautiful. And I really appreciated I just appreciated. So I'm keeping this. I feel like that's obvious. Next, I read The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. You have heard me gush about this cover. This is an Owl Crate exclusive cover with shiny edges. Always beware when I talk to you about the cover first, because it's usually not a good sign. This book has been hyped by a lot of people, has been really loved up and loved on by a lot of booktubers that I respect, and I didn't dislike it, but I gave it a 3 stars. And I think for me this was maybe a case of the hype of other people really set my expectations so high that this book could not achieve them. So I did still enjoy it, but it wasn't resonant with me. Like, this is not a book that I'm going to continue to think about for weeks, months, years after. So The Kingdom of Back follows Nannerl Mozart, who is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's older sister. She herself was a musical prodigy, equal to, if not as good as Wolfgang himself. But because of the time and the era that she lives in, her gender is a huge hurdle that she cannot seem to consistently overcome. And part of how she and her little brother kind of cope with life in general is by creating stories for one another. And The Kingdom of Back is one of those stories that comes to life. And Nannerl ends up kind of bargaining with one of the creatures in this fictional space that she and her brother have created, and it is as much about her pushing against the boundaries of her time as that deal that she makes and the conflicts between the two. So the premise itself, really love the idea, and I think Marie Lu's writing is lovely. I would very much like to read more of her work, because particularly the first handful of pages have some of the most beautiful, stunning writing, that, like, very impactful first couple of pages. Now, for me as a reader, I felt like between that cool premise and those first couple of pages and the sky-high expectations that other folks in the community had set for me, the rest of the book just didn't live up to all of that promise. So that's why I think it gets a 3 stars, because there are still some really good things going on in this novel. I think Marie Lu does a really good job of creating characters in a compelling way that you understand their pain and their flaws, and it's not just like, oh, there's the character flaw. You sympathize and you empathize, and you just have to wonder, what if the time or the era had been different, or, what if she were born in a different place, and you really just kind of start to go on that emotional and mental journey with the author. I did not overall feel like the conflict between the real world and the magical world was all that resonant for me as a reader. I usually love stuff like that. I usually love fae kingdoms or fae journeys and conflicts, but like this just didn't capture me in the same way that I was expecting it to. And I can't quite put my finger on why. I think it has a lot to do with those expectations I mentioned, but I think it also, like, I wasn't as connected with Nannerl as I thought I would be, given the tone of the overall piece. So I think this is going to go in the maybe box. My mind tells me that it should go in the no box, because I'm not going to reread this. I'm happy to recommend it to somebody who is really interested in historical-oriented fantasy and think it has a really good message about being able to empower people, both in the sense of fantasy and in the real world. But I am not convinced that this is a reread for me. What's making me put it in the maybe box is just how freaking pretty it is. So I kind of need to put it in the maybe box and remove myself from the beauty of the actual book bind up and make an informed decision about how I actually feel a couple months down the road. So we'll see what happens with this, but it's sadly going in the maybe box. So the last book I read in July was one that I swooped in order to complete a challenge for the Pop Culture Readathon, and that is Dan Brown's Angels and Demons. So this is my very battered and bruised copy of Angels and Demons that I got at a library sale many, many years ago. I remember reading the Davinci Code when all the hype was there for the original publication of that book, and I really enjoyed it, and I've always kind of wanted to go back to the world of Robert Langdon, who is the main character of this series, and he is a Harvard symbologist professor who gets sucked into kind of these mystery thriller situations that have to do with ancient symbols. And the books overall have a lot of ties with the Catholic Church and the Vatican. So in particular, Angels and Demons is considered kind of like the first book in the series, or the prequel to the Da Vinci Code, where you meet Robert Langdon for the first time. So I gave this book 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It is a fast-paced, action-oriented mystery thriller. This is the kind of mystery thriller that I actually love because it reminds me of like a more modern, more adult version of like Sherlock Holmes meets Indiana Jones. And so I really like that kind of vibe in my books. And what ended up taking this down to a 3.5 star, because I think my initial feeling is that it's probably more of a 4, but I think it loses at least a half a star, if not more, for some of the stuff that goes on in here just really hits me different. This book was originally published, I believe, in either 2000 or 2001. I'm not 100% clear because the inside jacket says one thing and Goodreads says another. So one of those two. As a result of that, though, there is definitely some lingering Islamophobia that takes place in this novel that made me very uncomfortable. One of the characters in here that is considered your antagonist is just a really thin caricature and a really bad one, and it justifies his characterization as being connected to like the Crusades and all of that, and it doesn't read well to me now in modern day reading this. I also really, it's such a small part of the book, but I really don't like the way Vittoria, as one of the central female characters in this novel, is described by men. Like, she herself is a very capable, smart, strong woman, and I think Dan Brown does a reasonable job of giving her agency. But the way that he has his male characters treat her and look at her is just so frustrating. It's definitely one of those like male writers writing women and describing like their breasts first and foremost, or like the suppleness of their legs, and I'm just like, nope. I also just think that there are some moments, because a lot of the tension in Dan Brown novels comes from the a lot of that tension comes from the friction between historical debates of science and religion. So I think he does a fairly good job as an author of making sure that when his characters give speeches or like present their ideologies, that it comes from the character's mouth. It doesn't feel like Dan Brown himself is preaching at you. He writes well enough that it feels like this is the character's stance. But at the same time, there are several moments from both the science and the religion side of that argument that feel like very soapboxy moments, and it kind of took it down a notch for me, because I was just like, oh, okay, I like it when books convince me of their arguments. I don't love it so much when they preach at me, if that makes sense as a distinction. But I still enjoyed it. It was such a fun, fast and easy read. So I do think I'm going to keep it. Even though it's at a 3.5 stars, I can see myself rereading this, especially when I just kind of need a escape. And I would probably like to read the rest of the books in the Robert Langdon series, just again, as an escape. So knowing what I know about some of the things that could annoy me about the world of Robert Langdon, I think I can go in better armed to kind of dismiss and disarm those when I encounter them. So I do think reading the series overall would still be a fun encounter for me. It doesn't mean I necessarily need to own them all, so they might be library picks in the future, but for now, I think I am going to keep this. We'll see if it makes it through like my end of the year purge or not, though. All right, so that is my July reading wrap up. I feel like it was a pretty good reading month overall. There were a couple of months where I felt like like the 5 or 6 books I had pulled from Litland, it was a struggle to get to, but this felt like a really good month of me just pulling in things to mood read a little bit as well as complete my Litland TBR. So that just felt really nice. So yeah, let me know if you have read any of these books down below, or maybe even seen some of the movie adaptations of them. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for spending the time with me. I hope you have a fantastic reading day. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of me or this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!